So if you can just unmute yourself and let us know that you're here. David Williams. Here. Thank you. Kimberly Johnson-Smith.
Here.
Angela Boyce-Claire.
Here.
Sherry Gagnon. Shivali Finkelstein. She's not in the waiting room. Okay. Emma Rial. Katie Gabrielle Black.
Here.
Marissa Eisner.
Here.
Melissa Kamba Kelsey.
Here.
Chloe Dyehouse.
Here.
Dave Aubin.
Here.
Alexis Rohrbeck. Jen Lima.
Here.
Jake Mather.
Here.
Denise Mansiri. And I'm Brian Lally. I'm here. Okay. Roll is all set. So it looks like next item on the agenda is just the approval of the meeting minutes from our last meeting on January 20th. And I hope everyone was able to review those. We did send those out and those were included in the agenda. So I guess, is there any discussion on those meeting minutes from the 20th? Okay, can I have a motion to approve the meeting minutes from January 20th?
Motion to approve.
Motion made by Dave, and do we have a second?
A second. Angela.
Thank you, Angela. All in favor? Any opposed? Okay, passes unanimously. Thank you. All right, so next up is we have updates from our 120 meeting, and this is sort of a carryover. We have our review of proposals for the DEI community assessments, and I think what we're looking to do is maybe talk about the two proposals that we received. I know that we had our meeting with the representatives. We got some follow-up documents that we were able to share with the committee. I think it was Public Consulting Group that sent over that example assessment that they had done. So I think at this point, we're able to sort of open up a discussion about them and kind of where we want to go from here. If we want to potentially make some recommendations for the school committee at their next meeting, and obviously what that recommendation would look like, particularly which group we might want to go with if we decide on one of them, and sort of the scope of the work. I know both of them gave scopes of work that included 8 phases. I think both of them were 8 phases, both pretty comparable when you looked at each phase, and then different price points for each of those. So I think we can kind of have a discussion about, both companies, what they presented and what we want to move forward with. So it's sort of open to discuss at this point, if anybody wants to start it off.
Brian, do we have to do the grading rubric also? I don't think we did that in the last meeting.
Yes. So
Okay.
The grading rubrics, which if you guys can remember, is this blurred out? Yeah, there we go. So it looks like that. I had sent that to all of you. If you guys need another copy, I can send that. But with the grading rubrics, the only thing that's objective and everyone needs to have the same points is for the cost proposal. So because Insight Education Group came in at the lower total cost, they get 30 out of 30 points. And Public Consulting Group gets 24 out of 30 points. So everyone just needs to have the same cost proposal. The 4 criteria above that, the staff qualifications, the capability, capacity, and qualifications of the offerer, the work plan, and the approach proposed, that can be different for everybody. So you can kind of assign as many points or as little points as you want for each group. And then we'll have our total possible evaluation points for each of those groups. I think it'd be a good idea if once we're done with this meeting, everyone send me those just so we can sort of have those in one place. And, those can be put on the website as well under our documents. But this would be good documentation to have, especially if we're proposing to the school committee potentially next meeting, what our decision is. So just make sure you're filling those out. And, I think we can sort of fill those out maybe at the end of our discussion, because, you might change your mind, depending on what people have to say.
Thanks, Brian. So how do you guys want to do this? Do you want to just, sorry, my dogs are bad because they're not getting fed. Like toss stuff out and like free talk? Do you want to go through the rubric? Do you want to go one at a time? How do people want to do it?
I think it might be helpful to go through the rubric and get people's opinions. I mean, just as a as a starting off point. But that's just a suggestion.
Okay, Brian, what's the first cost you said was fixed? What's the next first thing on the rubric?
Staff qualifications, if we go back to the top there.
Okay, so the two companies are Insight and PCG. If you guys remember from the Zoom video, we had the gentleman, I think Michael Moody from Insight speak, and then we had 3 representatives from PCG. The 3 representatives that spoke to us from PCG are actually the 3 who would be on our team. We didn't meet the people that would be on the team from Insight, but all of their qualifications for both groups were in the packets. Anybody have any thoughts about the staff?
I did rate the PCG group more highly based on their presentation and their demeanor during their presentation for us.
I scored them higher as well. I think that the team of 3 and each one showed professionalism and expertise, I think, in an experience of doing it. So I did score them a point higher than I did the Insight.
I did as well, but it's also it's hard to compare apples to apples because we really didn't meet the team for the other one, and basing all of this on their written description of their team is it's really difficult to do. So I think probably no matter who we would have met, if we would have met the other team, who knows? And maybe that's a request that we could ask, is that we have the opportunity to talk to or at least meet the group of people that we're going to be working with.
I think that as far as time goes, we kind of need to make a decision sooner rather than later. So we kind of have to go with the information that we have in front of us. I mean, they gave us in the proposal who the staff would be and what their qualifications were. And to me, I think maybe that speaks to the organization that the one had their team actually come speak and then the other didn't.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I think that speaks volumes about the company and the organization as a whole.
Right.
I'm just pointing out that it's really difficult to compare apples to apples.
I will say both companies, and Denise had provided the references, both companies had, good references. Both companies had, people speak very highly about the staff members that worked with them. So there wasn't any negative feedback about the team from Insight.
I think initially when I was just reading through the proposals before we met with either company, one thing I really liked about Insight was their team seemed to be comprised of educators, whether it was teachers, administrators, sort of people involved in education. Whereas Insight, maybe not everyone directly involved or coming from an education background, but I kind of agree with what Dave and Angela had said. After meeting with both of them last month, definitely more impressed with the public consulting group and sort of their team of 3 and what they had to present. And I certainly didn't think that their resumes were bad. I like the educational background that Insight was coming from. Yeah, I think after meeting with them, sorry, lights just went off. I'm in the library. I'd rate public consulting group a little higher.
I also rated public better. I was a little worried that, my first impression, I was like putting too much emphasis on that. But, in retrospect, after thinking about it, like, I feel like, it was clear that public, put more effort into their first impression. And that speaks volumes to me about, I feel like public really came out and they knew their stuff, they knew who we were and our needs. And I think that first impression is important, and Insight's first impression makes me nervous, especially since this is something we would be spending a lot of money on.
I agree with you, Chloe, especially like you said, they did their research. They know about our district. They know the issues that we're facing. And to me, that spoke volumes that they had taken the time. They said they watched the school committee meetings and things like that. So that really shows thoroughness and preparation. And if you do that for an interview, if you don't do that for an interview, I'm not sure that you do it in the job, I guess, necessarily.
I also rated public consulting group more highly. I mean, on paper, the staff qualifications look the same to me, but the representation that we got at the meeting, the last meeting, spoke volumes to me about their professionalism. So I preferred public over the other group.
Anybody else have any comments they want to share about the staff or the team that would be working with us? Okay. Brian, what's the next one on the rubric? Oops, you're muted. We can't hear you.
Sorry about that. Capability, capacity, and qualifications of the offerer is the next one.
Again, for the same reasons, I rated public 2 points higher than I rated the Insight Education Group.
Some of the things that they touched on when they were speaking to us, I will rate them higher when we write this down. It's like, a couple things that they said, the offers were pretty much the same in terms of, because they were responding to our RFP. So like they're quoting us back the same thing. But a couple things that they said while they were talking, I had gone back, like they said they believe that student voice should be at the table and that their voice is key. Like that was important to me that they said that. They said that it's absolutely essential to make sure that our district is serving every single child as much as they can. And they said that they're coming in with a research background to take an objective look and make sure all of our conversations are grounded in data. And that was important too. Whereas the person from Insight was more talking about like professional development and, other things like that. He wasn't really talking about the work that we had asked to be done.
Do you remember, was it, because I know Denise had reached out to contacts or references for both companies, and I know that she got more feedback on one company than the other. She got more feedback on Insight?
She did get more feedback on Insight, yes.
So just to that point, because she did get overwhelmingly positive feedback from the references from Insight, so I think some of that might speak to their, capability, capacity, qualifications. It seemed like the districts that worked with them were really happy with that work. I don't think we got any bad recommendations for public consulting group. I just think that we got less contact. We made some phone calls or emails that weren't responded to. So for what it's worth, I know that we did get very good recommendations and feedback from the references for Insight.
I appreciate that, Brian. But at the same time, I wonder if they were providing those school districts what we are asking them for, because in the interview, they were speaking about other like professional development things. So I wonder if their professional development is extraordinary and maybe they're not quite so good at this. I'm not sure.
Yep.
Just a question. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to make it to those presentations, but I'm just hearing the conversation. I'm wondering if other got a sense of the experience level of the two companies, because I can see it sounds like public is consulting groups getting in general higher marks. Just hypothetically, if they're sort of new at the game, they might be more dedicated to making a stronger first impression because it's sort of like they need to get into the game. Whereas the other group, Insight, if they're sort of, geez, people are phones ringing off the hook. So, and I get how that might be a concern, but I guess on the flip side, I don't know if others got the impression that public consulting group actually has experience, considerable experience in this area, Ren experience.
Yeah, they seem like they have experience and that they've been doing this for a while. Specifically, I'm trying to find my notes, the people that were going to be on our team, one had experience in the Broward County, Florida district, making sure that equitable policies were implemented. Another one, I can't find I took notes on the staff, but I can't find it. But they definitely seemed like they did have experience in what they were doing.
I can add a little bit of just in terms of what I think capability capacity. One thing that stood out for public consulting group for me was just their physical location and proximity to us, that they do have a capability of coming in person. And while I know that we've all been working in a virtual world and have gotten used to that, I think there is something to say for doing focus groups, for example, in person and being able to see body language and the nonverbals just as much as the verbals. And I recognize that probably Insight could come here as well. I would imagine that might have impact potentially on budget or scheduling or whatever, but just that piece with the physical proximity to us. And I believe experience with districts kind of in our region as well. So.
I think when talking, they both state pretty early on in the packets. It looks like Insight has 21 years of experience and PCG has 30 years of experience. I think either one of those is plenty of experience, in my opinion.
I guess, Jake, I was thinking more about the particular individuals, like if they're new,
understood.
sort of newbies, right? And it's like, hey, but it sounds like though that issue's covered. So.
Anybody have anything else about the offer, this subject on the rubric that they want to questions, concerns?
I'll just echo what Melissa said about the proximity that in terms of like their approach and work plan, I scored them higher in those areas as well because of the proximity, because of the in-person focus groups, because I absolutely agree that body language, facial expression, things not said are sometimes even more important than what is said. And so I think that's really valuable to me. And again, what Jen said in the beginning about student voice, and that they look at the data, but that also includes the qualitative data of the interviews of focus groups with the students, with the faculty, with the staff and community members.
Thanks, Angela. What's the next one, Brian?
Next item is the work plan. So I know in looking at both proposals, they were very similar in terms of and I guess, I don't know, maybe this could be work plan or the next one, which is approach proposed. But the phases were nearly identical. And Jen, like you said, they were responding to RFP. So they were responding to, information that we were looking for. But it seems like they utilize a lot of the same strategies, focus groups, surveys, looking at financials, looking at, professional development, curriculum, family and community outreach and engagement. So, there was a lot of similarities between the two. So I think for me, it came down to sort of picking and choosing which of those phases we might want to go with, and then kind of looking at pricing and what that might look like as a total cost. Because like I said, the phases were nearly identical. And I think both of these, for this type of work in these companies, I think they probably have a somewhat of a template that they can use in terms of what they're going to be providing for us. So I guess I just didn't see too much difference between the two for maybe the work plan and really maybe the approach proposed. That was the next item on the rubric.
The one thing that PCG noted, and I don't remember if Insight did, maybe somebody else did, was that they set up an email specifically for the project and advertise it so that people are able to communicate with them if they want to. Did Insight say anything about that?
Not that I remember.
Okay.
And yeah, I like that part about PCG.
Brian, if I could add something here just to echo what you had said, I felt similarly with PCG and the fact that it was outlined very clearly, all of the phases, including the questions that they were looking to ask. I think that's really important to outline the objectives for everyone that would be involved in the focus group so we know what to expect. It's really important to be very transparent, and I felt they were extremely transparent in what they presented, which makes me want to rate them higher in those categories. And then I also thought, thinking about cost effective, what are some phases that we may not want to even go with, and we may want to look at the data, for example, or maybe cherry pick what we need, what particular data sets we need to look at or we need support with. Through one of the companies, because I know as a district you already collect so much data and you already have systems in place that you may be able to save costs. So that's why I'm sharing that to be considered.
I looking at the work plan, and then this also might be biased because of my impression of the two companies. Apologies in advance. My impression was kind of like, I saw the plans and they seem pretty similar, as you said. But based on my impressions of the companies, it kind of felt to me like maybe for public consulting group, it was more like they were creating a project for us and shaping it to our needs. But for Insight, it was like we were buying a product that they had already made and had done for a bunch of other people. And it was like I felt like Public's work plan was more like they were more molding it to what we needed than Insight.
Thanks, Chloe. Anybody else have any comments, questions on that area?
What did everyone think about the phase related to curriculum review?
That was on my thing to pull out. What about it? Yeah.
Only because of what has already been presented at these committee meetings in terms of what the district has already done and presented publicly. And I think, again, kind of starting where you're at and then working from there,
Yeah, I made 2 notes on 2 phases that we could potentially pull out if we were looking for ways, and curriculum was one, and then the allocation of financial resources was the other. Those were the 2 that I looked at, and I said, maybe those were areas, but especially like you said, we just bought new curriculum. We've gone through that, where curriculum review is something that we as a district could do ourselves if we decided, based on the results where we needed to go. But I don't think that we need to have them review the curriculum at this point, but that's just me.
And I wonder too about the extent to which, MTSS, RTI data is already being pulled, discipline data is already being pulled, and specifically those are areas that are quite costly in the way in which the proposals were presented. So again, using the resources and the teams that you already have in place to be able to present the data that they're finding. And you can discuss from there.
I had also marked curriculum down. I'm sorry, Brian.
No, go ahead, Dave.
Oh, I'm sorry. That was sorry. I had also marked curriculum down as one of the things that we could cut, simply because it is done by the district, and I feel that it's pretty reflective, and I think we could explore areas where it's not reflective of our population and do that on our own.
Yeah, the same thing. One thing to back up just a minute, we were talking about the phasing, and unless I'm missing something, because it is split between 2 pages, between 47 and 48, their phasing is very, very similar, with very, very similar descriptions. And as Brian and Jen said, it's largely probably due to our RFP that sort of focused that. But one thing that Public Consulting Group has that I can't find in Insight is they have that largest line item, which would be like their phase 9, their project launch, final report and recommendations roadmap of $17,250. It looks, and again, I might be missing something because it's split between the 2 pages, that Insights is built in. That's not an additional. The verbiage is still there. Provide final report that assesses the cause of inequality and recommends strategic But it's not an additional amount associated with that. Where if you take all the other phases and add them up and subtract that 17,000 from PCG, they're actually less expensive than Insight. So I'm just wondering how they've built that in, or how Insight has built that into all of the other phases, and if that's truly, they provide that final report and recommendations at no cost, where PCG, that's their largest line item.
Yeah, Jake, I noticed that too. The difference between the total cost is really comes down to that roughly 17,000. That's what makes public so much higher, and they do have that asterisk on the Public Consulting Group next to that, which it says that 17,000 assumes that the final report and recommendations are inclusive of all 8 phases. So I think if we were to sort of cherry pick certain phases that we wanted, that final number for the 17,000 for the final report and recommendations would be reduced. And then looking at even things like comparing phase 1. Public Consulting Group, their phase 1, which does include survey focus groups, some of the same things as Insight, is actually, almost $2,000 less. So, just in terms of looking at the cost, I think, depending on what phases we felt were necessary for this, I think we could probably come up with a number, that makes sense and is doable for the school committee if that's what we're looking to make a recommendation for. But I noticed that same thing. But I think when we did ask that of Insight Education Group, I think that they did say no additional cost. That total number 57,500 includes the final recommendations and things like that. But so it does seem like it's just built in within each phase.
But so anyway, I think I already said it, but the curriculum review was one of the things that did pop out at me, because we have spent a lot of time on curriculum, considering the fact that we just implemented it last year, the new curriculum. But anyways, maybe something that we can pull out, or at least phase down.
Did anybody else have any thoughts in looking at the phases, whether there were any that maybe weren't needed or that could be, like Jake said, pared down?
in thinking about the curriculum, that was also one of the areas where I felt like we could make some cuts, but I'm wondering if we can still ask whoever we go with to talk to teachers and students and parents about people's experiences with the curriculum. I know people have feelings about it, and I think that's still important data, and we could ask the companies to put it into another category somewhere.
That's a great idea.
Yeah, and that might be a perfect, the initial phase one, that has the surveys and stuff like that. That might be a perfect phase to bring that question in.
I think for me, in looking at the phases, sort of my non-negotiables, ones that I would definitely want in our proposal would be phase 1, which would be sort of survey focus groups, soliciting that feedback, and also phase 8, which is the family and community engagement practices review. In kind of thinking about the purpose with this RFP, it's really to kind of find out areas that this subcommittee can kind of work on, moving forward, and areas to target. And I think utilizing both of those phases, it would involve, teachers, students, administrators, parents, families, alumni, community members. It would really sort of cast a wide net, and gather a lot of feedback that I think we could then kind of move forward with. So those are two that I think I definitely would like to see, no matter what we go with. I kind of agree with what other people said. Curriculum review is one that I didn't necessarily think was needed right now. Student data review, I'm not quite sure about either. We have so many data points across the district. I think that we can kind of pull from, and maybe depending on what the results are of surveys and focus groups and the recommendations, maybe from some of those other phases, that might be something that we could sort of dive into, but I'm not quite sure we would need that from, either company at a cost of, $8,000 or I think it was maybe 5,000 or 7,500. Yeah, the other group.
Can I say something for a second, Brian?
Yeah.
The data is a really tricky piece, and if we have an outside group looking at it, if we are going to go with a company that's going to be evaluating us, seeing it from the outside, from that group, I actually think that piece is essential, because it can be seen in so many different ways and different facets, especially when you're looking from it and you are on the inside and seeing what's going on and being involved in the day-to-day, activities in a school, or knowing the students personally. I think seeing it from an outside view and seeing how we look through that lens is probably important, because it could be skewed otherwise. Even though data is supposed to be objective, we know it can be very subjective depending on how it's manipulated.
I agree with you, Marissa.
Which makes me wonder, and again, I probably need to read this in a little bit more detail, but how much data they just collect on their own, and how much data is given to them, and how that impacts that price. Because if we have the data and they review it, or we provide them the data, because you're right, we have a tremendous amount of it, and they just do a subjective review of that. That may be very different than them collecting data on their own, and then turning around and reviewing it. So, just a thought.
I wondered a little bit about the leadership and staff readiness portion, if each of those parts would really be necessary. One of them is about high quality programming and high quality teachers. I think in our district, from the families, the students, admin top down, we're really high quality. I don't know if that has to be assessed. Professional learning for teachers and administrators and support staff. Again, I'm not sure if that is something that we would need an outside agency to come in and say, this is what you need. I think we have established a pretty good system for our PD.
if I can piggyback on what Dave is saying, I think, you know, high quality teachers, we're very fortunate that we are in a district that has an exorbitant amount of amazing educators, and we don't necessarily have the same issues as larger districts that have to fill in positions more quickly, more readily, and take a lot of emergency certifications. We don't have that. So I think looking at teaching staff, faculty, isn't necessarily something we need to do. On the flip side, professional development, if they're talking about being culturally responsive, we've done a lot, but after their findings, there definitely may need to be something that we don't recognize that needs to be there. So I'm not sure if that's something we look at after, or if that's going to be in the final report. Is that because they have to see what we already do? I'm not so sure that that should be taken out of the mix if we need to see how our professional development is going to be chosen so it's the most effective.
And also in terms of like readiness to take this work on, I think that's an important observation for us to get also, because if the climate and the culture of the leadership in the district is not really embracing this, I think that's something that should come out and that we need to be aware of.
And to piggyback on a little bit with what Marissa said, we don't know what we don't know, and that's the reason that we're doing this. So we might think otherwise. We not to say anything bad about anything, but the reason we're doing this is to find out what we don't know and how we can improve. So if we're, and again, I do think there's room in here to make cuts, but I don't want to go into it with a attitude of, oh, we're perfect on that. You know, we don't need to, there's no improvement needed here. I just want to be careful about that.
Yeah, I also think that could look maybe not so great from the outside, right? So like we're going to have an audit done and we're removing the part that evaluates the teachers, or we're scaling back the part that evaluates the teachers. Like, I don't doubt all the things you're saying, and my kids have had great experiences in the school system, but I just worry about how that might look. You know? Yeah.
So if I'm hearing correctly, I think we're all kind of in agreement that the curriculum phase itself is maybe not needed as long as we address curriculum issues in the survey questions.
I think so, Jen. Yeah.
I also think, I mean, if we were going to eliminate any other phases, we could do that with any phases we get rid of. You know, if we decided that, you know, any of those other phases maybe weren't needed, financial resources, we could work with the company on questions and sort of target that and maybe get some feedback from the community. So yeah, just something to keep in mind. I think if there's any phase that we're looking to eliminate, I still think we could, you know, still try to get some feedback about how people are feeling about those topics or kind of where we stand with them.
That if we eliminate entire phases and add those, you know, add those to the initial survey phase, that we, you know, we remove the $10,250 curriculum review phase, but it is going to beef up perhaps the survey portion of this. So maybe the surveys will go up by a little bit. I don't know how the company is going to respond to that. I'm just thinking about how we're just in some ways transitioning some of these into other phases, and how that might be impacted in their budgets. But I do think no matter what we do, for this to be competitive and comparative, that we should be asking both of these companies to do the same thing and see how, particularly when PCG's bottom line final report recommendations is its own line item, and Insights is not. We have no idea how the prices are going to be, how the prices are going to fluctuate when we ask them these questions or ask them to amend these proposals.
Let me ask a question. Cost being equal, does everybody have a clear idea of which company they would prefer to go with?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I guess then my thing is, instead of asking the one company to work on the cost, why don't we, instead of asking them both to, why don't we ask the one that everybody I think is probably leaning towards what they can do to get the cost down closer to? I mean,
I think we still need to ask the other company to be fair and be competitive and be even if we all think that we have our minds set on this, we don't know what we don't know again. And if it's just an exercise, it's not an exercise, but if it's just us asking them to amend a proposal, I don't see the downside of that.
the only thing is timing. We really kind of need to have we need to decide which one we want to go with. And if it's a question of, yes, we'd like to go with you, but the cost is too much, what can you do with it? You know what I mean? That makes it a little bit easier to proceed than it is, well, we'd like to go with you, but we're still also waiting to see what the cost is from the other company.
I understand. I'm just trying to think of it from an outside perspective and to really try to cross all of our T's and dot all of our I's and make sure we're not jumping to a conclusion. We all have a good feeling about PCG. I think that we know that's the direction we want to go in, based on a whole bunch of things, cost not being one of them, but I think cost needs to be. I think that's a priority for a tremendous amount of people.
Oh, absolutely. And that's why I would like to ask PCG what they can do to get the costs down, and give them our recommendations on where we'd like them to cut.
And I'm just saying, in the meantime, or at the same time, I don't see the harm in asking Insight to do the same thing. It's not going to take any longer. They're not working on this together. They'll be doing these separately and hopefully get this back to us. And obviously, we need to give them a deadline. Get these back to us at the same time.
Okay. We're going to have a separate meeting then in order to do this, if that's the way that we're going to go, which is fine. I don't have a problem with it. I just want to make sure that everybody knows that we're going to have to come back together to review it prior to the next school committee meeting.
I hate to be that guy that does this, but I don't see another way around it. I don't see how we can make a recommendation when we don't have all the information. Even if because our recommendation has a budget associated with it, and we don't know what that budget is.
I think for me, cost isn't really going to sway me one way or the other. I think what I've seen, I like PCG more. And I think I'd be comfortable making a recommendation to the school committee, even if with the phases that we were going to choose, that was more expensive than Insight. I think the reasoning behind it, I feel comfortable using that as backing. So I don't think I'd like to reach out to see if they, I think I'd like to make a decision tonight on the company to choose what phases we'd like to see, make that recommendation to the school committee. And I know it's a little awkward because we have 2 school committee members on our committee, but the process here is we make the recommendation to the school committee. If the school committee feels like they want us to amend our recommendation or go back and get more information, they can send that back to us and we can take that up. But I don't know that it's, I think if this group feels comfortable with one company, I say we move forward with them.
And I'm just going to continue playing devil's advocate for a minute. Just this meeting it's a public meeting, meaning that Insight and PCG could be observing, and if we make a decision right now, there is zero incentive for PCG to be reducing any of their pricing if they don't think it's going to be competitive. That's, I'm just speaking from a business perspective and in how I receive proposals, because I receive proposals every day. And on my client's behalf, and right now our client is our community, this 100% has to be competitive all the way through until we make a decision.
I didn't get the sense that the pricing that they gave us would increase at all. I think if anything, it would just decrease if we didn't want to go.
But there would be no. I don't understand what the incentive for them to decrease the price if they know that we've already made a decision.
Well, I think maybe we haven't made the decision to proceed. We'd like to know what the other options are, and if they can come down on the price, then they would be the one that we would go with. And if they can't, then we've got to regroup.
Is it part of the charge of this committee to worry about cost? Or are we, or maybe that's a silly question, but are we just making a recommendation to the school committee about which group we think is better, and then if they feel like it's too expensive, then come back to us and say, we feel it's too expensive.
Yeah, we are an advisory committee. We're supposed to be making a recommendation, budget and cost and all that stuff.
Including cost, okay.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we could say to the school committee, we want PCG in its entirety, like the whole kit and caboodle, and they could get that recommendation and be like, nope, too expensive. Come back and tell us what phases you can do without. You know what I mean? So I think if we make our recommendation, what we would like to see happen, then the cost part is up to the actual school committee. That's just my take on it.
The cost is the largest possible points on this criteria. Cost is 30 points. Nothing comes close to that. So a cost absolutely has to be part of the criteria. And I'm sitting here wearing two hats. So it's really hard for me to represent both. But yes, I think cost absolutely has to be part of the criteria, because it is.
And remember, I mean, we're a committee. A proposal can be made. We can take a vote. Nothing says it has to be, 100% unanimous. So if somebody wants to make a recommendation one way or the other, we can always do that and take a vote and proceed.
Can I just also voice the opinion that I hear you guys saying that the curriculum was just, revamped. I don't know that I'm necessarily in favor of cutting that part of the proposal. I can understand the rationale for it, but I think actually an objective evaluation of the curriculum, what's the worst case scenario is they come back and they say, geez, all this work that you just did, you should redo it. I can understand the concern about that, but wouldn't we want to know that? And on the other hand, they could come back and say, wow, you guys did a great job with this, right? And it would be good to get an objective view about that. So I just wanted to throw that out there, that I don't know that I'm necessarily in favor of cutting that aspect of the, I think that could, Jake, you've been saying we don't know, and I think that fits that theme.
I completely agree. And I totally understand that's why we're hiring these people, because we don't know.
So do we want to say, this is the company that we recommend, these are the phases that we think are the most important to the least important, and then have the school committee decide? Like, what's the way where do we want to go from here with what we need to be comfortable with what we're handing off to the school committee? So what are you guys comfortable with?
I'm honestly very interested to see if DEI, if equity is a value for the school department, where are you going to put your money? And I appreciate that we're really challenging each other in this space, because it, I think, shows that we're not just like, oh, let's go with the most expensive and the fancy or whatever. And I think that will be up to whoever really does control that budget to say, here's what we're willing to put our money on. And here's why we can back that up, because we have these thoughts from this particular advisory committee or whatever.
Excellent point, Melissa.
And just to add to that point, and Jake, I heard you, I thought about that too, that the cost is the biggest piece of the pie here. But even with that, 5 points need to, one way to look at it, 6 points would need to be made up It seems based on the discussion like that can be done. That those 6 points can be made up.
I agree, and cost is the only part of this that's not subjective.
I just think, and we talked about this before, like at the last meeting, and I know Jake, you and I disagree on this, but I think cost is, I don't want to make this decision solely on cost. Like if there are the cost is important, but I think that if we believe that we will get a better experience with one vendor, and it's just a matter of, I'm not prepared to sacrifice quality for cost, I guess is where I'm going. No, and I'm not saying that you do, but I know.
don't think we disagree on that. I think it's about value and not about cost.
I don't think we'll get the same value, even if you got the two companies at the exact same price for the exact same thing. My gut would still say go with BCG. That's just. So anybody have any recommendations for how to move forward? Maybe somebody who's not me or Jake, because we're gonna have to.
So to me, it seems like cost is already being factored in and weighted quite heavily as part of the rubric, and so I guess to me it's like that's the consideration of cost. It's not inherent to the evaluation process, and so if at the end of the scoring rubric, with cost included, we come out on one side or the other, cost has now been factored in because it was part of the rubric. And so we end up on one side or the other. Each person's going to have their own score. But to me, then that is the cost has been factored in. And I don't know whose job it is, or if it's anyone's job to sort of like negotiate. That would be a separate. It sounds like it's not separate, so maybe I'll just stop talking there because I just don't know how it works after that. But the cost is already being factored in. It's already being factored in.
So for the first 1, 2, 3, 4 criteria on the rubric, cost doesn't necessarily need to be brought into that conversation because cost is the 30 points at the end. So I totally understand your perspective.
So I think I'd like to make a motion, and assuming, so I'd like to make a motion that we vote on a company that we would like to move forward with. And assuming there is a majority vote on that motion, if we decide that we like a company that we want to move forward with, then from there, maybe talking about what phases we'd like to include in a recommendation to the school committee, or just maybe next steps after that. But I think that's the motion I'd like to make right now, that we would take a vote right now on moving forward with one company.
Do you want to make a motion for the company?
I'm sorry. I think we need to vote on our scores first before we can vote on the company that we would recommend. Right? So what I'm hearing Brian say is he's making a motion for us to, I guess, submit our scores and see what the majority says in terms of this rubric. And if that is the motion, then I second that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I wasn't necessarily saying it had to be related to the rubric. I think that's an important part of it. But I guess my thought was, sort of taking a vote, raise your hand if you're in favor of Insight Education Group, tallying that. Raise your hand if you're in favor of Public Consulting Group, tally that. And if there's a clear majority or, a majority for one, then that's the one that we then focus on. I guess that's sort of what the motion I was making.
I guess I have a problem with that in that completely negates the need for this rubric entirely. What's the point of that? I mean, if we don't use the points add them up.
Well, I think I mean, I'm voting for the one that I scored higher. People can do whatever they want. You can vote for the one that you scored lower, but I'm voting for the one that I scored higher.
Okay, so we are taking individually the rubrics that we have filled out ourselves to cast our vote, and I'm fine with that. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I just didn't. I wasn't thinking like, I would say, hey, I scored public consulting group this and inside education this, but
I think
here's what I'm getting at. My motion is that we take a vote right now for each group. People can second that motion, and people can disagree with the motion that I just made, and you can say no to that, or you can say yes, I agree with that. I think that's sort of the process here.
I think maybe the reaction to the use of the rubric is the point about how the rubric is factoring in the cost, and so if we are we basing our vote on the rubric, it means implicitly that we have considered cost, and that we find the other factors outweigh cost because it's a function of the rubric. So if we're voting based on our score on the rubric, we have necessarily considered cost. Whereas if we're not voting on the rubric, we may not have been considered cost. I think that's sort of maybe the reaction to. So, because you could have a vote that doesn't consider that's just sort of like, I think this group is better, but you're not taking cost into consideration. Whereas if you're basing your score on your vote on the rubric, then you necessarily.
I think personally we should look holistically at both groups, including cost. I think that should absolutely be a part of our decision.
So that's based on the rubric then, because cost is included in that. Has
Sure.
everybody filled out the rubric or is comfortable with filling out the rubric, and everybody knows looking at their rubric which one scored higher and who they want to go with?
Just from a housekeeping perspective, what happens to these rubrics? Do they get filed?
We're going to give them to Brian, and Brian gets to decide what to do with them. They'll go out on the website with the rest of the documentation.
Public documents,
Yeah.
yeah, just like everything else that's involved with the committee.
I'm just one vote, but I'm not comfortable making a vote right now on a recommendation.
So my motion's out there, but nobody seconded it, so we're not moving forward with that.
Angela just seconded it.
Okay. So all in favor of voting on one company right now? I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And
Kimberly's up too, so everybody but Jake.
okay, so
Being the outlier,
Jake.
which is all part of the process. That's why we have the Roberts rules, and yeah, that's okay. Okay, so we had in favor and Jake opposed. Let's mark that down. Okay, so that passes with a majority. So I guess technically I'll make no. Now we can just vote. I don't need to make a motion for that. So I guess just raise your hand if you would rather move forward with public consulting group.
I guess I need to abstain then.
9 and Kimberly, I don't know if that's the hand from the last one or for this vote.
For this vote.
Perfect. Thank you.
Don't forget your hand too, Brian.
Did I not count myself?
I think that's 10 if you do.
Yeah, 10.
Okay. Thank you. And I guess raise your hand if you'd like to move forward with Insight Education Group. I am seeing 0 on that.
And again, I'm going to abstain from that vote.
Yep. And Jake's abstained from both of those. Okay.
Okay, thanks you guys. I know this has been a long process and with a lot of information, so I appreciate everybody going through it. So now, do we want to prioritize, pick a phase that maybe we wouldn't need? Do we want to kick it over to the school committee as it is and have them figure out, you know, are there any modifications that we want to make to the proposal as we have received it from PCG in our recommendation to the school committee?
I think yes. I think I don't think I'd want to propose the scope of the work as it is for that total price. I think that there are certain phases that aren't needed. I mean, I guess one way that we could go about this is going phase 1 through 8 and seeing who wants to include each one. And I don't know. I mean, do it by a majority vote, or I'm not sure unless anyone has any other ideas.
I would make a general statement that I would like to accept it as is. And I guess that's just based on the idea that I feel like they're the experts, you know, that they're, and so, you know, we can view it sort of holistically, and they're telling us this is what they feel like we need. Again, there aren't specific pieces that any piece that we would eliminate, I think, you know, Melissa sort of made comments along these lines too. Like, if we're committed to this, let's do it. Let's do it the way it's supposed to be done. We might regret eliminating pieces of it. So in that spirit, maybe a motion to retain the entire thing as is, right? A motion to retain the work as is.
Are you making that motion, David?
I make a motion to retain the scope of work the way it is.
Okay, is there a second?
I can second.
Okay, all right. All in favor?
Aye.
I don't know what I have to do now. Since I voted.
Well, so hold on, wait. Can everyone keep their hands up? I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So I see 8 hands for yes. All those opposed? I see just 2 hands, I think. Okay.
Kimberly's had her hand up for both. Which one is it?
Sorry.
That's okay. So just Katie, right?
I was a no on that one too.
Okay, so 2. Okay.
Okay. No, 2. Okay, so that motion passes with the majority as well.
And again, I think I have to abstain from that, but I don't know.
I'll mark that as well. Luckily, it wasn't close, so it's even if you were supposed to vote, that was not going to make a difference. Okay, so that motion passed. So I think what we have is that we'll be recommending to the school committee at their next meeting that we want to move forward with the full PCG group proposal with all 8 phases with their total price. And when is the next school committee meeting? Is that the 8th or 4th
March
of March?
8th, March, whatever the Tuesday is.
Yep.
The 8th, yep.
Okay.
And I would encourage anybody on this subcommittee to feel free to come to that meeting, you know, and speak to this subject, you know, for, against, you know, modifications, you know, whatever. I think it's important that the full school committee, you know, hear from people.
I second that. Community voice.
You can't vote, Jake. You've abstained. No, just kidding.
I'll echo that.
Okay.
Terminology. I'll echo that. Yeah, community voices are just unbelievably powerful on the school committee.
Katie, is there anything you want to comment on?
It just felt like we've been grappling with what to cut and where to do it, and we're the ones who have spent the most time with this data and with these proposals, and it feels like we're punting responsibility for making decisions to the school committee, which is not as necessarily informed about these groups as we are. So that's why I voted no on that.
Okay.
And that's why it's super important to vocalize that, because this is an advisory committee and that's why you guys should show up and talk about that, or send emails to the rest of the school committee vocalizing that.
Absolutely. Okay. Does anybody want to add anything else before we move on? Any concerns, questions, comments? Okay. Thank you, guys. I appreciate all the counting and back and forthing and all of that stuff. But I feel comfortable with this proposal, and I think Melissa said it better than anything else. Is this a priority? Yes or no? We're about to find out.
The only thing I'd like to add, I just, thanks for everyone's work on this. I mean, this sort of been like a 2-3 month process, getting the proposals, reviewing them, meeting with them. So just thanks for your work on this. I mean, these are, 2 large proposals that we had to review and really kind of think thoughtfully about. And I think we really did that. So just appreciate everyone's work on these 2 things.
I second that too. Thanks, Brian. Okay, so the last thing on our agenda for tonight is the school calendar. We had talked about it in November, I think. We had talked about the possibility of making recommendations, and the proposed calendar. I'm trying to pull it up right now. Hold on, I can't seem to get it in my. I'm going to drop it in the chat. The proposed calendar has come out, and the school committee is going to be voting on it in the next meeting. Let me see. I'm going to send it in here and tell me if everybody can open it. And so I just wanted to bring this back before the group. We had talked in November about, the need to be inclusive with our holidays, how to balance which ones to observe and which ones just to note. We talked about the possibility of replacing Columbus Day with Indigenous Peoples Day. We talked about the fact that we're providing for Christian holidays within our calendar, but no others. And
did that link work for anybody else?
No. Okay, hold on.
I think that was a link to your Gmail.
Oh, everybody reading my mail? Let me see.
I just opened up my Gmail.
Some of it's super exciting. Let me see if I can find. Let me find.
I had it open for a second, and then I have it. If anybody wants, if I can just share my screen.
Can you? I was gonna say I have it too. I'll share my screen. Maybe I'll share my screen. Hold on.
I can share mine, Jen.
Can you, Jake? I'm like technologically.
All right. Can everybody see that? All right, super.
Okay, so this is the calendar. There is going to be a poll going out to the district just to get. We did a survey like 7 or 8 years ago that kind of covered, do people want to start before Labor Day? Do they want to have February vacation? Like, how far into the school year do they want to go? So Dr. J is going to be sending out another poll with those questions, and this may change based on that. Before, primarily, the overwhelming majority of the district likes to start after Labor Day. So that's what this is based on. So I guess my question would be, does anybody have any recommendations, concerns, anything that they'd like us to make to the school committee about this calendar?
Jen, do you know when we have to vote on this calendar?
I think on the 8th also.
It's on the 8th.
Yeah.
Okay.
As part of the poll that's going to be sent out to the district, will you be surveying families and what families celebrate at home
We had talked about that last night, and we decided not to, only because the overwhelming majority of people in this district are Catholic. So any result from that would automatically be skewed to show, not enough people, quote unquote, voting for it to include it on the calendar. Does that make sense?
It does, but I think that doesn't sit well with me, only because we're trying to, we're sitting from a lens of, DEI and promoting inclusiveness. And if one feels left out, to me, all feel left out. And I think that was, that's been shared multiple times on this committee. And I just want to put that out there for discussion.
Okay. We can definitely add that if we want to add it. That's absolutely, the question had come up specifically as it related to Jewish holidays. And we decided to keep it off only because we didn't feel that the numbers, I'm supportive of adding them, but we didn't feel that the numbers based on a poll would back that up. So, but we can certainly add that to it.
And it corresponds nicely with a conversation that we had about, I mean, that's the entire point of a poll, is because we don't know what we don't know.
Right. You're right. No, you're right.
We assume.
We don't, yes. Jake, I agree with that point. And only, if you're surveying families, you're surveying student experiences, and they bring those into the classroom and they celebrate those, they share those with their peers, their teachers. And I think just being reflected, being represented even in as simple as a calendar in some ways speaks volumes. And it speaks volumes, I think, to the spirit of our conversations here around DEI.
So you're not asking, your suggestion was, what do you celebrate at home, not what would you like to see on the calendar. Is that correct, Kimberly?
Perhaps both.
Okay.
We don't know what we don't know. And I like that as a starting point. I think it comes back to, our purpose with engaging in this work that's ahead of us, with the consultants coming into the district. I'm curious about what others are thinking based on what I'm sharing.
So, Kimberly, what I'm thinking is that getting all of that on the official calendar, it would be very difficult to do. But what about if, say, this was a 2-page document where you have the official school calendar, but you have a calendar and on the side you point out all the different holidays that that may be celebrated by families in the district. So it's kind of like a flip side. So you have the official school calendar, but the district also puts out another calendar, maybe on the flip side, to understand what other holidays are being celebrated by other families in the district. So we're acknowledging those holidays, and the district is putting out where those holidays are. I think it would also be helpful for teachers to have that available. So because I know in our school, we always say if there is another holiday that is observed by a non-Christian religion, that excuse them from the work or what have you. Maybe if everybody has that and acknowledges what's there, maybe that can be something that can be done. So they're still acknowledged, but they're not put on the official calendar because there's only so much room. And really the official calendar is more about days off as opposed to recognizing holidays.
I agree completely with that. And it actually, there's that note at the bottom about religious holiday observances and for those who notify the school. And I see zero harm in listing those holidays that people observe. We go to the effort of making that note down there, so that
there's a couple districts that already do that, which is nice. It shows, these are the other common holidays that may be observed. And I think, like Marissa said too, it gives the teachers the heads up, like, such and such a date is such and such, so I want to avoid that, because teachers may not know what they are.
Right, because
a lot of college calendars have that as well.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. I'm saying we've had that issue in the past where totally innocent someone was, and this was years ago, but a test was being given on the first night of Passover. Well, that's a high holiday. There's a Seder going on. There's no way anyone could stop that. And then the teacher had said, oh, try your best. Well, it wasn't intentional and whatever else. And obviously we took care of it. And again, years ago. But, something like that, it was an innocent mistake. But that's a huge impact on the child, and it's a huge impact on the family. And in order to avoid all of that, just to make people aware and cognizant of it, having just a mirrored calendar, just like we have here for 2022-23, and on the flip side, and just highlight in different colors or what have you when those holidays are, so they're there, so everyone is aware. And especially kids may want to know, or families, oh, my friend is Muslim and they're going to be celebrating Ramadan, so I want to make sure, or Al-Eid, I want to make sure I looked, I'm going to make sure that I wish them a happy holiday. It creates inclusivity. So it just may be something that if we're embracing that as a district, then other people will recognize that as well and embrace it for all other religions.
Yeah. I agree, Marissa. want to emphasize that somewhere, and I think maybe it says that I can't read that small print, that any religious observance would be an excused absence. And I think that needs to be really clear to, our families and teachers, because like you said, they plan a test or they have, a project due on, so I think it needs to be excused as not only for the work and what happens in school, but, for student attendance records as well.
I agree that I think that the knowledge, I think that the knowledge that students are allowed to be totally exempt if they're out because religious holiday is knowledge that needs to be more widespread in the schools. Like, as someone who's currently in the high school, I can say that a lot of teachers, will talk to us at the beginning of the year, like what counts as, like, if you're absent, what are times where I will exempt you from doing the work or whatever. And, I've never heard any teacher mention that religious holidays, teachers will say, if you're at a wake, for example. But I think that it's important that the teachers know that they should make students aware that that is something that is an option for them. You know what I mean? And that they shouldn't have to feel nervous that they'll have to make up a lot of work for that. I think it's something that not only should, I think that what's one of the most important things is that students and parents are aware of this.
And maybe adding that second page with all the holidays and moving it from a teeny tiny little print at the bottom to putting it at the top of that, religious holidays are excused, they're observed. These are some of the common ones. We'll draw attention.
We're talking about a stage. It may be that we can reorganize this graphically so that there is a square or an asterisk or something like that on the physical day on the actual calendar. People don't have to flip it over, and then it references that note with a list of getting a lot of stuff on one page. But I just sometimes find that if I have a 2-page or a double-sided document, it sits up on my refrigerator and I never flip it over.
I wonder if, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I wonder if the disclaimer kind of statement down at the bottom could be rewritten to be more like the non-discriminatory clause that comes at the bottom of most of our documents, the official documents. So it says something along the lines of, the North Kingstown School Department is a religiously inclusive community, blah, blah, blah. Please let us know of any observances that are not on the calendar, or please advocate for your child or have your students advocate for themselves, and let teachers know or faculty know so that we can make adjustments. Certainly not those words, but that idea. Yeah.
I love that, Dave. That's
Those
great.
were pretty good words, Dave.
Oh, thank you. I've been thinking about this for a while because I did have a student who was, and I can only imagine what's going to be in the headlines on some of these internet posts tomorrow, but she was a Wiccan and she did ask for Samhain to not have to do work that night because it was the Wiccan New Year. And I was really proud of her for advocating for herself and speaking up. So that's something that we definitely should do.
No, that's great. So if I am hearing correctly, we're saying we would like to poll our families about what holidays they celebrate at home, poll our families about what holidays they would like to celebrate, and irregardless of the answers to those questions, we would like to note the religious holidays on the school calendar along with a much more emphatic, inclusive statement about their observance.
Because we have to vote on this at the next school committee meeting, I'm not sure we're going to have time for a poll. And Dr. O'Jay said last night that he was going to have one put out so that we could make that. Yeah. Yep. No, my heart was beating through my head. I couldn't hear anything else.
How do others feel about recommending a change of Columbus Day to Indigenous Peoples Day?
Oh, definitely.
I'm for that.
Can we make a motion for that, or making that recommendation?
Yeah, absolutely. We can make that. Brian, can you pull? Okay, so can somebody make a motion and then we'll vote and then we'll go from there?
I'll make a motion to change Columbus Day to Indigenous Peoples Day.
I'll second that. Okay, I can't see the whole screen because Jake is still.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
My stop share is over on my other screen. Okay.
Okay, so all in favor of making the recommendation for Indigenous Peoples' Day, raise your hand. I can't see. Okay, Chloe, you're a no. I just want to confirm.
Sorry, I was spaced out.
Okay, so you're a yes. Okay, all right. So everybody unanimous, I think. We lost Brian. Hold on. Brian, are you back? No. Okay.
Hey, can you hear me?
Now we can. Yep.
I'm so sorry. My computer just died. The meeting didn't end, did it?
No, we just took a vote to change Columbus Day to Indigenous Peoples Day. Can you give us the yay or a nay on that?
I'm yes on that, yes.
Okay, so we're unanimous then. Okay. Okay, awesome. So we'll make those recommendations. Melissa?
Just a question, just for my own education. What, if we do this poll, what's the magic number or percentage to make a holiday a day off from school, or how is that process? Just curious.
I don't know if there is a magic number. Like, I'm not sure if 95% of the district came back and said that I'm just gonna make it a holiday, they wanted to celebrate Arbor Day. I mean, I'm not sure whether that would be enough to say we're gonna take Arbor Day off, because I think the issue is we can't have every single day off. You know what I mean? So I think, but to see a priority of, you know, more people want this, or even if like people don't want to see it, but people are celebrating it at home, I think that's just going to all factor into the decision.
I think the question showing up on a survey or a poll is important.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, and we should have thought of that last night. So I'm glad that was pointed out here today. Thank you. Does anybody else have any comments, questions about the calendar? No? Okay. I feel like we did some really good stuff here tonight, you guys, and thank you. And please come to the next school committee meeting and advocate for what we discussed tonight. If everybody could send their rubrics to Brian, that would be great. And our next meeting will be March 16th. And I'm guessing it will be in person by then, but I'm not sure, and we will confirm that as we get closer.
I think never mind. You're right.
So if nobody has anything else, can I get a motion to adjourn? Angela?
Motion to adjourn.
I'll second.